Emma Collins had chosen Maplewood Apartments because it was quiet, ordinary, and safe, a place where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen, and for someone who had just come out of a painful divorce, that kind of silence felt like healing. She worked at a small marketing firm downtown, spent her evenings cooking simple meals, reading, or watching old shows, and told herself she was content being alone, even if sometimes the quiet felt heavier than she liked to admit. Her neighbor, Daniel Harper, lived next door, and from the first week he moved in, he stood out not because he was loud or charming, but because he was gentle. He held doors open, smiled politely, kept to himself, and never crossed any line. They spoke only in passing, brief talks in the hallway or near the mailboxes, conversations about weather, work schedules, or the broken elevator, and yet Emma noticed small things, like how Daniel always listened fully when she spoke, or how his smile lingered a second longer than necessary before he turned away. One evening, after a long and tiring day, Emma stood alone in her kitchen washing dishes, the window cracked open to let in cool air, when she heard Daniel's voice through the thin wall, low and serious, clearly on the phone. She wasn't trying to listen, but the words reached her anyway, slipping through the silence like they belonged there, and before she realized it, she was standing still, hands resting in soapy water, heart slowly tightening. Daniel sounded tired, thoughtful, nothing like the casual tone he used in public, and when he said, "I know I didn't plan for this," Emma felt a strange pull, as if the conversation was somehow meant for her ears. There was a pause, then his voice again, softer, more honest. "Living next to her makes it harder than I expected," and in that instant, Emma's breath caught, her mind racing as she understood he was talking about her, not in a careless way, but with something heavy underneath. She told herself to step away, to turn on music or leave the room, but she stayed frozen, because another part of her needed to know why, needed to understand what she had unknowingly stepped into. And when Daniel continued, saying, "She deserves someone who isn't still putting himself back together," Emma felt a sudden ache, sharp and deep, because those words carried respect, distance, and longing all at once. She didn't hear the rest of the call, or maybe there was nothing more said that mattered, because the damage, or the opening, was already done. She finished the dishes without remembering how, went to bed with her thoughts spinning, and slept poorly, her dreams filled with half-formed conversations and unanswered questions. The next morning, she tried to act normal, telling herself that overhearing something private didn't give her the right to change anything, but when she stepped into the hallway and almost walked straight into Daniel, her heart jumped before her mind could stop it. He looked the same as always, neat jacket, calm expression, polite smile, but the moment his eyes met hers, something shifted, as if he sensed the truth before she spoke a word. They stood there awkwardly for a second too long, the quiet pressing in, until Emma, unable to pretend, said softly, "I heard you last night," and the hallway suddenly felt too small for honesty. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by surprise and then something close to regret, and for a moment, he looked like someone who had been carefully holding something back and just lost his grip. He didn't ask what she heard or how much, he simply nodded, as if he already knew, and then, with a gentle, almost sad smile, he said, "You weren't supposed to hear that," not in anger or fear, but in quiet truth. Emma felt her chest tighten, not because she was embarrassed, but because those words carried weight, as if the moment had crossed a line neither of them knew existed, and standing there in that narrow hallway, she realized that her simple, quiet life had just changed direction without her permission. Daniel cleared his throat, stepped back slightly, and added, "I'm sorry," before walking past her and down the stairs, leaving Emma alone with her thoughts, her heart beating too fast, her morning suddenly heavier than before. As she watched him go, she understood that what she overheard wasn't just about attraction or proximity, but about two people standing on opposite sides of their own healing, unknowingly close enough to affect each other, and for the first time since moving into Maplewood Apartments, Emma felt something she hadn't expected at all, a mix of fear and hope, fragile but alive, growing quietly in the space between two neighbors who could no longer pretend they were just passing strangers. After that awkward hallway moment, life in Maplewood Apartments changed for Emma in ways she didn't immediately understand, because Daniel continued to be polite and kind, yet he became distant, careful not to linger or create any situation that might remind them both of the words exchanged or overheard. She noticed it in the way he now avoided standing near her door for too long, in the way he replied with short, Polite sentences instead of the small, lingering conversations they once shared, and in the subtle tension whenever they passed each other in the hallway or at the mailbox, a tension that made her chest tighten without warning. Emma tried to convince herself it was her imagination, that maybe she had imagined a shift, but every small gesture, every careful smile, every avoidance told her otherwise. She found herself watching for him from her window, noting the way he moved around his apartment, the way he sometimes paused on his balcony as if lost in thought, and she realized that her curiosity was no longer casual, it had become something more, a longing to know what he felt, a desire to connect even when logic screamed that she shouldn't. Days stretched into weeks, and she caught herself replaying the conversation she hadn't really had yet, her mind filling the silence with possibilities, what-ifs, and fears. She questioned why his voice had affected her so deeply, why his careful words had unsettled her, and why she now found herself hoping for an encounter, even a brief one, that would allow them to speak honestly. One rainy afternoon, as droplets ran down her windowpane, Emma felt a sudden impulse to reach out and send a text to Daniel, unsure if he would even respond. "I didn't mean to overhear, but I'm glad I did." Minutes stretched, then hours, and when her phone finally buzzed, it was him, simple, direct. "I'm sorry if I made things uncomfortable. That wasn't fair to you." The apology felt honest, unpolished, and for Emma, it was enough to crack open the space between them, allowing a fragile connection to form. That evening, there was a soft knock at her door, and when she opened it, Daniel stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee, the rain dripping off his jacket, his hair slightly mussed, eyes tired but warm, and he said, "I didn't want silence to be our story," and Emma realized that in this single, quiet gesture, he was offering a bridge over the distance that had grown, an invitation into honesty without demands, without pressure, just presence. They moved to sit at her small dining table, the air filled with the sound of rain and quiet breathing, each aware of the tension and possibility, neither rushing, neither speaking too much, yet both feeling that something important had shifted. Emma watched him sip his coffee, the way his fingers wrapped around the cup, the careful attention he gave to her reactions, and felt her own walls begin to crumble, brick by brick. The conversation started slowly, almost hesitantly, as they skirted around the real reasons for the knock, sharing stories of their day, trivial work incidents, and neighborhood gossip, but even in these small exchanges, Emma could sense the unspoken acknowledgement of their previous night's events, the weight of his words, and the shared awareness that their connection had deepened without a single declaration. As the evening wore on, they laughed softly over a minor mix-up with a delivery, a sound that felt both familiar and new, and Emma realized she hadn't laughed this freely in months, not without the shadow of past hurt looming over her. Daniel's presence was grounding, comforting, and frightening all at once, reminding her that the human heart was fragile yet resilient, capable of sudden awakenings when least expected. They didn't talk about feelings directly, but Emma noticed the way he occasionally glanced at her with a softness that wasn't there before, a look that suggested he was wrestling with emotions he couldn't yet name, and she felt the same, a mixture of longing, fear, and tentative hope rising inside her chest. When he finally stood to leave, he lingered at the door, his hand brushing hers briefly, a touch light and fleeting but charged with meaning, and said quietly, "I'm glad we talked," leaving Emma standing in the quiet apartment, the rain still falling outside, heart pounding, mind spinning with questions, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hand. That night, Emma lay awake, thinking about the distance that had suddenly shrunk, the vulnerability that had been shared, and the possibility that what started as an accident, her overhearing words not meant for her, could become something beautiful, fragile, and real, a connection built on honesty, small gestures, and the courage to step into feelings neither of them had fully understood before, and she realized that waiting, watching, and allowing moments like these to unfold might be the only way to find a love that was patient, gentle, and deep. Weeks passed after that rainy evening, and Emma and Daniel settled into a quiet rhythm, a delicate dance of proximity and distance that neither had planned but both felt drawn to, as though the universe had nudged them together in small, careful steps. They would pass each other in the hallway and exchange polite smiles that lingered a second too long, share coffee in the mornings when the elevator broke down, or brush past one another in the lobby, their hands almost touching but not quite, leaving behind a charge of unspoken words that hung between them like invisible threads. Emma felt a pull she hadn't felt in years, a mix of longing and fear, excitement and restraint, because Daniel was careful, and she could sense he carried pieces of a past that made him cautious, yet his presence was steady and warm, a contrast to the turbulence she had grown used to after her divorce. She caught herself imagining what it would be like to walk beside him on quiet streets, to sit and share thoughts without walls, to be understood without explanation, and every glance, every small gesture, made those imaginings feel both terrifying and thrilling. One evening, they found themselves sharing the small community garden behind the apartments, a space of soft lights and rustling leaves, and for the first time, Daniel spoke more openly than he had in weeks. "I lost someone I loved a long time ago," he said, his voice low, steady, but tinged with a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see, and Emma felt her chest tighten, knowing he was offering a part of himself that was precious and guarded. She nodded, letting him continue without interruption, feeling the weight of his honesty settle around them like a shared secret. "I promised myself I wouldn't risk hurting anyone again, but living next to you, it's complicated, more than I expected," and Emma felt that familiar pull of tension and curiosity, wanting to ask questions but afraid of shattering the fragile truth he was giving her. "And me," she finally whispered, her voice carrying the weight of fear and hope, and Daniel turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with a seriousness that silenced her doubts. "You make me want to reconsider that promise," he admitted, a confession that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds, exposing emotions they had both kept hidden. They didn't rush to touch, didn't rush to speak more, but just sat together in the fading light, sharing space and vulnerability, a mutual acknowledgement that something important had shifted. Emma felt tears threatening to spill, not from sadness, but from the sheer intensity of recognition, the way two people could stand on the edge of their own fears and still reach for each other. Conversation ebbed and flowed between them, often about nothing significant, yet every word carried weight, every pause full of meaning, and in the silence, they understood each other more deeply than any casual talk could convey. Emma realized that love didn't always announce itself with fireworks, sometimes it arrived quietly, in shared looks, tentative honesty, and the courage to sit with uncertainty. As darkness fell, Daniel rose to leave, lingering at her doorway as if weighing every word. "This doesn't fix everything," he said softly, not to diminish the moment but to acknowledge their reality, the past and walls they both still carried. Emma smiled, her heart both heavy and light, replying, "But it's a start," because she knew beginnings often came quietly, one honest moment at a time, and that was enough to spark hope. After he left, Emma stood in the middle of her apartment, listening to the soft hum of the city outside, her mind replaying every glance, every word, every subtle touch that had passed between them, understanding that something delicate but powerful was growing, a bond formed not from instant passion but from patience, honesty, and a shared readiness to explore what could be without forcing it. She thought about the nights ahead, the walks they might take, the conversations that might deepen, and felt both excitement and caution. The connection between her and Daniel was a gentle, steady current pulling them closer, a story unfolding slowly, naturally, and Emma realized that for the first time in years, she was ready to step into something uncertain, yet beautiful, because vulnerability shared in trust could become the foundation for love, and she wanted to see where this careful, honest, and growing closeness might lead, even if the path was unknown. Autumn had settled over Maplewood Apartments, painting the streets gold and orange, and Emma felt the crisp air matching the mix of anticipation and calm growing inside her as she and Daniel began spending more time together, sometimes walking in silence along quiet streets, other times laughing softly over small jokes, their presence together easy yet charged with unspoken feelings. Every moment felt significant, every glance held meaning, and Emma realized that their connection had deepened from shared honesty, small gestures, and the courage to be vulnerable without forcing words, building a foundation neither of them had planned but both felt drawn to. One evening, under the glow of a streetlight, Daniel stopped mid-step, turning to her with seriousness in his eyes, and said, "I might need time. I can't promise more than I have right now," and though Emma's heart skipped, she met his gaze steadily, understanding that love did not always come with certainty, and replied, "I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for presence," a simple declaration that shifted the tension into something tender and real, something that allowed them to exist together without pressure. Daniel reached out, lightly taking her hand, a touch careful but meaningful, and in that single gesture, Emma felt the quiet strength of what had been growing between them, the willingness to be present, the choice to stay despite fears and past wounds, the courage to allow themselves to feel without rushing. They walked together under the falling leaves, the world around them moving at its usual pace, yet for them, time seemed suspended, every step a testament to patience, trust, and gentle attraction. They didn't need to speak every thought, because the space between them was filled with understanding, with a shared rhythm that allowed vulnerability to bloom into something tangible. As they paused at the corner near her building, Daniel looked at Emma, his voice soft, almost hesitant, and said, "I'm glad you heard what you weren't supposed to," and Emma smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest, knowing that the moments they shared, the quiet admissions, the careful attention to one another, had transformed a chance accident into a meaningful connection. That night, as Emma closed her door behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come, from overheard words through a wall, to hesitant messages, shared coffees, walks in the rain, and now to the courage of being together without demanding more than they could give. She understood that love was not always dramatic or grand, sometimes it was gentle, steady, and quiet, yet capable of shifting the heart profoundly. Days turned into weeks, and their bond grew stronger not because of declarations, but because of presence, honesty, and trust. Every small gesture, every shared smile, every moment of quiet understanding was a thread weaving their lives together, creating a tapestry that felt safe, real, and hopeful. Emma thought about the past months, how she had moved into Maplewood seeking calm, only to find herself caught up in emotions she hadn't anticipated, and realized that the beauty of this connection was in its authenticity, in the way two people could navigate past hurt and caution to create something tender and meaningful, grounded in respect and care. Daniel, too, reflected on the unexpected shift in his life, how someone as patient and understanding as Emma had managed to reach him without demanding, without rushing, simply by being present and genuine, and he recognized that the choice to stay, to nurture this slow, careful connection, was one of the most courageous decisions he had made in years. Their walks continued, hands brushing or lightly held, conversations flowing and pausing as the moment required, laughter shared without pretense, and silences that felt comfortable rather than awkward, each experience strengthening the bond that had begun with a simple acknowledgement of honesty. Emma felt a quiet confidence that she hadn't known she could have, a sense that she could be herself fully with Daniel without fear of judgment, and that their connection was not about perfection or speed, but about mutual care, trust, and the willingness to face uncertainty together. Every step they took in the falling leaves, every glance exchanged under the streetlights, was a reaffirmation of their choice to be present, to stay, and to nurture what was fragile yet deeply real. One evening, as they returned from a walk, Daniel paused on the stoop, turning to her with a gentle, genuine smile, and said, "Being here with you, it feels right, even if everything isn't fixed," and Emma nodded, understanding that this simple acknowledgement, the willingness to embrace imperfection and uncertainty, was at the heart of what mattered most. That night, as she watched him walk away, she felt a calm strength she hadn't felt before, a realization that love could be patient, quiet, and steady, that it could grow from honesty and presence rather than drama or grand gestures, and that the journey of slowly opening hearts was sometimes the most beautiful path of all. In the following days, they continued to build their connection gently, with walks, coffees, shared small moments, and silent understandings, each interaction reinforcing trust, warmth, and emotional intimacy without pressure or expectation, creating a relationship that felt secure, respectful, and full of quiet joy. Emma thought about the future, not with fear, but with hope, knowing that the choice to stay, to be present, and to nurture the growing bond between them was a decision grounded in care, patience, and shared vulnerability, a love story unfolding one careful step at a time, simple yet profound, and she felt a sense of fulfillment in the quiet certainty that sometimes, the best connections began not with passion, but with honesty, presence, and the gentle courage to stay.